From the moment Rena Parker first set foot in Crestwood Estates, she felt a surge of optimism. She was young, eager, and thrilled about her new apartment overlooking a tidy courtyard with a sparkling pool. In her mind, this modest spot symbolized independence and comfort, a chance to live among friendly faces in a calm, welcoming environment. But not long after moving in, she encountered Carol Mullins. Carol lived in the same complex, albeit in a unit one floor up, and was well known for her watchful eye. The first time Rena ever noticed Carol was in the mailroom, where Carol scrutinized her with a hint of mistrust. It struck Rena as odd, but she shrugged it off, attributing it to casual curiosity. A couple of weeks went by. Rena spent her days settling into her new space, unpacking boxes, and arranging her living room just so. Each time she passed Carol in the hallway, Carol offered a tight nod or else abruptly looked away. Rena tried greeting her once, only to be met with a curt, "Good morning." No further pleasantries. But everything changed on a humid Saturday afternoon. Feeling the heat, Rena decided to unwind at the Crestwood Estates pool, a resident privilege she was delighted to have. She donned her favorite swimsuit, grabbed a paperback novel, and headed for a lounger by the water. For once, she was determined to enjoy the sunshine after a hectic workweek. She'd barely settled in when she heard a familiar voice ring out behind her, Carol Mullins. Rena looked up to see Carol glaring down, arms crossed. "Excuse me," Carol demanded. "Are you even allowed here?" Her accusatory tone made Rena blink in astonishment. Confused, Rena calmly explained she was, indeed, a Crestwood Estates resident, even showing her building keycard as proof. Carol, however, remained unconvinced, muttering about outsiders and how not everyone belongs in our facilities. The insinuation that Rena was trespassing felt like an ice bucket of shock. "What do you think? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories like this." This bizarre confrontation left Rena uneasy. She tried to resume reading, hoping Carol's gruffness was a misunderstanding. But in the back of her mind, she sensed hostility that went beyond a simple question. Rena knew she had every right to use the pool, she'd signed the lease, paid rent on time, and followed all rules. Why was Carol acting so territorial? Though rattled, Rena chose not to escalate things, figuring Carol might just be irritable or protective of the shared amenities. She'd soon learn it was more than that. Carol Mullins's suspicions ran deeper, fueled by biases that Rena was only beginning to suspect. Little did she know, this unexpected clash by the pool was merely the start of a troubling episode. In the days ahead, Carol's watchful glare would evolve into a far more serious standoff, one that involved law enforcement, rumored immigration secrets, and repercussions no one in Crestwood Estates saw coming. Following that tense poolside exchange, Rena Parker hoped things would settle down. After all, an apartment complex like Crestwood Estates was designed for convenient, communal living. She imagined neighbors sharing casual hellos and occasionally lending cups of sugar. But Carol Mullins, it seemed, had a different vision, a guarded one, focused on deciding who belonged and who did not. A couple of days after the incident, Rena ran into Carol near the communal laundry room. Eager to mend any friction, Rena offered a greeting. Carol barely acknowledged her, pressing the start button on the washer with exaggerated force. Silence hung in the air like damp linen. Rena felt a pang of discomfort but decided not to push. She'd continue living her life peacefully, believing Carol's hostility might fade once she realized Rena wasn't a threat. Things changed again one muggy afternoon. Fresh out of work, Rena returned home, craving a refreshing dip in the pool. Clad in comfortable shorts and a t-shirt, she crossed the courtyard, noticing the water glinting invitingly. She approached a lounge chair, set down her keys, and was about to dip a toe when she heard the staccato clack of high-heeled shoes on concrete. Turning around, there was Carol, eyes narrowed, posture rigid. "You're here again," Carol remarked. "Don't you have somewhere else to swim?" Rena tried to keep her voice level, reminding Carol that as a paying resident, she had every right to use the facility. Carol responded with a dismissive wave of her hand, muttering about "our complex" and "outsiders who shouldn't be trespassing." Rena felt a ripple of anger. This was no misunderstanding, Carol was singling her out, implying she didn't belong. Attempting to de-escalate, Rena calmly repeated her address and unit number. She even offered to show Carol her ID if that helped. But Carol just walked off, mumbling under her breath. Rena exhaled, half hoping that was the end of it. Not 10 minutes later, Rena was halfway through a relaxing back float when a pair of Crestwood Estates maintenance workers hurried over. They asked if she had any ID on her. Confused, Rena asked what was going on. They explained that Carol had flagged a trespasser in the pool. The maintenance staff, looking uneasy, apologized for bothering Rena but said they had to check. She showed her building keycard once again, clarifying that she was indeed a leaseholder. The workers nodded, offered a quick apology, and left, clearly embarrassed. Fuming, Rena realized Carol had escalated her interference by involving the staff. The frustration was building in Rena's chest. Still, she wanted to keep the peace. She dried off, packed her towel, and returned to her unit, thinking, surely Carol's done messing around now. She wasn't. The next morning, Rena found an anonymous note taped to her door. "We watch out for suspicious activity. Don't overstay your welcome." The scrawl was sloppy, but Rena had no doubt who orchestrated it. Feeling uneasy, she clutched the note and locked her door behind her. Anxiety welled up. Was she being stalked by someone who believed she didn't fit some imaginary standard? That sense of apprehension climaxed later that afternoon. Rena was finishing her grocery run when her phone rang, an unknown number. She picked up cautiously, only to hear a neighbor, Marisol, on the line. Sounding flustered, Marisol blurted, "Rena, you need to come quick. Carol Mullins is at the pool, on the phone with the police, claiming you're trespassing again." Rena's stomach flipped. The police? Overusing the apartment pool? Hurriedly, Rena dropped off her groceries and headed out. By the time she arrived, a police cruiser had parked near the curb. Two uniformed officers stood talking to Carol, who gestured wildly toward the pool gate. Spotting Rena, the officers approached. Rena explained, as calmly as possible, that she was indeed a resident. She showed her building keycard, her driver's license, and even a copy of her lease from an email on her phone. One officer cross-referenced her ID with the management office, confirming Rena's story was legitimate. Meanwhile, Carol looked on, arms folded in a posture of indignation. She tried to interrupt, talking over Rena, insisting, "I've never seen her here legitimately, and she's lying." The officers listened politely but seemed skeptical of Carol's claims. After a cursory investigation, they concluded Rena had done nothing wrong. In fact, one officer suggested that Carol's call might have wasted police resources. They sternly cautioned Carol about misusing emergency services for personal disputes. Humiliated, Carol insisted she was only looking out for the complex's safety. The officers weren't having it. By the time they left, Rena felt a swirl of relief and lingering frustration. She thanked the officers, though she wished such a ridiculous situation never had to happen. The onlooking neighbors murmured among themselves, some clearly appalled by Carol's behavior. One older resident approached Rena, leaning in to whisper, "You know, I suspect Carol might not even be here legally herself. Rumor says she's been lying about her status for years." Rena's eyebrows shot up in surprise. For a split second, she pushed that aside, thinking it was gossip. Yet, the neighbor's tone suggested a genuine rumor that had circulated in hush for quite some time. Retreating to her apartment, Rena replayed the police encounter in her mind, still rattled that Carol had dialed 911. She also couldn't ignore the neighbor's remark about Carol's possible deception. Could there be irony in Carol accusing Rena of trespassing when she might be hiding a secret about her own right to remain in the country? Rena found the possibility mind-boggling, and ironically poetic. She tried to refocus on her everyday routine, hoping Carol's meltdown had ended once the police admonished her. But something in the neighbor's claim gnawed at her. If Carol was indeed misrepresenting her status, that might explain her overly defensive stance, projecting her anxieties onto others. Still, investigating it felt like a can of worms Rena wasn't sure she wanted to open. Yet, the memory of Carol's hostility lingered. The scornful looks, the menacing note, and the extreme measure of calling 911 demanded a response. Rena, never one to let injustice slide, found herself at a moral crossroad. Should she dig deeper, or try to preserve her own peace of mind? For now, she had no clear answer. But as she stored away the note, the memory of that afternoon fueled an unspoken resolve. If Carol continued her baseless attacks, Rena might do more than just defend herself. She'd expose the hypocrisy festering behind Carol's unwarranted accusations. A day after the 911 debacle, Rena Parker found her mind wandering back to that neighbor's cryptic hint, that Carol Mullins herself might be hiding an immigration secret. The thought lingered like an unsolved puzzle. Was it idle gossip, or was there substance behind the rumor? Returning from work, Rena bumped into the same older resident, Ms. Delgado, in the hallway. Summoning her courage, Rena asked, "I didn't want to pry, but you mentioned Carol might not be here legally. Do you know more about that?" Ms. Delgado pursed her lips, then explained in hushed tones that rumor had it Carol had bragged about forging documents to remain in the country, claiming she had allies to shield her from scrutiny. Ms. Delgado's friend once overheard Carol mention an upcoming citizenship test that never seemed to materialize. Intrigued yet cautious, Rena listened carefully. She had no desire to become a vigilante, but Carol had repeatedly harassed her. Perhaps a taste of her own medicine might be overdue. Still, Rena's moral compass twinged. Did she really want to dig into personal details of Carol's life? Another part of her retorted that Carol had escalated matters by calling the police, so verifying the truth was fair game. That evening, Rena decided to poke around. She hopped on her computer, researching public records. She discovered the local county's property database indicated Carol Mullins had lived in Crestwood Estates for about 4 years. Nothing unusual there. She then tried searching for Carol's name in general public records, court cases, marriage licenses, naturalization databases. She wasn't sure how far she could get using only open-source information, but to her surprise, something did come up, a mention of a Carol Mullins in the Registry of Permanent Residents. The site offered no direct details, only confirming that someone by that name had once been granted a green card, not full citizenship. Rena felt a flicker of intrigue. Could it be the same Carol Mullins? The possibility was high, given that Redwood County wasn't enormous. If so, Carol might not be a citizen at all, contradicting the air of authority she projected. Rena bookmarked the page, wondering if the neighbor's comment about possible forgery was accurate. She double-checked to see if any mention of citizenship ceremonies existed for Carol. None did. That might mean she never took the final step. A wave of unease hit Rena. She recognized the seriousness of immigration status. Lots of people have complex stories, and not all shady. But given Carol's blatant hostility, Rena suspected she had a valid reason to keep digging. After all, Carol had singled her out, calling 911 for no reason, humiliating her publicly. If Carol was hypocritically misrepresenting her own right to stay in the country, that context could shine a light on her entire approach. She paused, though, worried about fairness. Investigating was one thing, turning Carol in on a hunch was another. Rena resolved to gather more definitive proof, if only to confront Carol's hypocrisy head-on. She told herself she wouldn't just run to authorities with speculation. Instead, she'd see if there was actual evidence that Carol had lied or broken laws. At first, she found nothing else. Then, by chance, a deeper internet search turned up a clue, a local news snippet referencing a Mullins family enterprise operating overseas. Curious, Rena clicked. The reference concerned a business in a country called Laronia, where the Mullins name had ties to a long-standing manufacturing firm. If this was Carol's family, it suggested a well-established background back home, contradicting any claim that she was here fleeing hardship. Could Carol have claimed asylum or used a similar route to get her immigration documents? If so, she might have overstated or even fabricated reasons for leaving Laronia. Rena's curiosity flared. A mismatch between someone's story of persecution and the reality of a thriving family enterprise across the ocean smelled fishy. A few days later, Rena's daily routine took a turn when she spotted Carol in the hallway again. Typically, Rena would walk the other way to avoid confrontation, but this time, a surge of resolve propelled her forward. "Good afternoon, Carol," she began, feigning politeness. Carol offered a cold glance. Rena mustered courage, saying calmly, "I found some interesting information about you online. About your status in this country and your family business in Laronia." Carol's face betrayed a flicker of alarm before swiftly returning to an icy stare. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped. "You're prying into my affairs now." Rena remained composed, explaining she simply uncovered public records. If Carol wanted to press allegations about who belonged in the complex, perhaps she should clarify her own situation first. Carol bristled, blurting, "Everybody does what they must to stay afloat. It's standard practice." She seemed to half admit that certain truths might have been bent, but she brushed it off as if forging documents or lying about reasons for immigrating was no big deal. The nonchalance stunned Rena. This woman had relentlessly targeted her for using a pool but felt no remorse for her own potential legal deceptions. Returning to her apartment, Rena mulled over what to do next. Carol's defiant attitude solidified Rena's suspicion that the rumor of immigration fraud was real. On one hand, Rena wasn't usually one to meddle in another's immigration status. People had complicated stories, especially those with challenging backgrounds. But Carol's blatant hypocrisy, using fear and the law to intimidate others while allegedly flouting the rules herself, felt indefensible. Confiding in Ms. Delgado again, Rena weighed the moral complexities. Ms. Delgado, though sympathetic to the struggles immigrants often face, pointed out that forging documents or lying under oath was a serious offense. If Carol had hammered Rena for trespassing when Rena was fully within her rights, it seemed only fair to hold Carol to the same legal standard. Finally, Rena resolved to contact the National Immigration Agency, the country's authority on immigration compliance. She rationalized that if Carol had nothing to hide, an investigation would clear her name. If, however, Carol had built her entire presence on fraudulent claims, then the consequences were hers to bear. Rena took a deep breath and dialed the hotline. The representative listened as Rena explained the suspicious evidence, contradictory stories about fleeing Laronia, a thriving family enterprise back home, references to an uncompleted citizenship process. The agent calmly took notes, clarifying that they'd investigate discreetly. Rena hung up feeling a mix of guilt, relief, and lingering anger at Carol's hypocrisy. Within days, she heard rumors that Carol had been called for an immigration review. She vanished from the building for a while, presumably meeting with officials. Some said they saw her escorted by federal agents. Word swirled that deportation proceedings might be in the works if proven she lied on official forms. At Crestwood Estates, the atmosphere changed. Some neighbors quietly approved, seeing it as karma, others worried about a meltdown from Carol if she came back. Rena tried to focus on her daily life, though each corridor walk or mailbox run carried an edge of tension. The final outcome remained unknown. But regardless, a sense of justice formed in Rena's mind. If Carol weaponized the law to attack others, she shouldn't be surprised if the law now scrutinized her. To Rena, it was about fairness. She'd never wanted a vendetta, but refusing to stand by while Carol's bigotry reigned felt right. The entire complex, once a silent stage for Carol's drama, braced for a finale that Rena sensed was inevitable. In challenging Carol's hypocrisy, she'd placed a mirror before the woman who insisted Rena had no rightful place here. Soon, the truth would surface, and for better or worse, Carol would face the consequences of her own brazen actions. A few weeks trickled by with no sign of Carol Mullins. In her absence, rumors swirled around Crestwood Estates. Some neighbors whispered that she'd been detained, while others claimed she was out of town seeking legal assistance for an impending immigration hearing. Rena Parker, meanwhile, went about her routine, work, errands, and occasional swims, feeling both relief that Carol wasn't around to harass her and mild anxiety over the unresolved tension. Then, one Friday morning, Rena stepped into the complex lobby and froze at the sight of Carol standing by the mailboxes. Carol's demeanor was subdued, lacking her usual hostility. Upon noticing Rena, she stiffened, as if bracing for confrontation. Rena considered walking away but decided to remain composed. Approaching slowly, she greeted Carol with a measured hello. Carol turned around, eyes flickering with a mix of anger and weariness. She said nothing, simply clutched a stack of letters to her chest. Rena suspected they were legal documents, given the seriousness of Carol's situation. For a moment, the pair stood in awkward silence. Rena recalled the day Carol had insisted on calling the police for trespassing, only to stand corrected by the officers. So much had changed since that petty incident. Eventually, Carol mumbled, "I know you reported me." Rena inhaled, meeting Carol's gaze. "I did," she replied candidly. "I found you were misrepresenting your status, using your legitimacy to hound others. I don't regret alerting the authorities." Her voice trembled slightly, but she pushed on. Carol's lips quivered in suppressed fury. "It's not as simple as you think," Carol snapped. "Paperwork. Processes. People do what they must." Rena held her ground. "That doesn't excuse the way you treated me, or anyone else, like intruders." She saw tears forming in Carol's eyes, though the older woman quickly blinked them away. Carol opened her mouth as if to retort, then pivoted, heading out the door without a backward glance. After that brief encounter, Rena's mixed feelings deepened. She recognized that immigration processes can be fraught with complexities, and forging documents or lying about background might stem from desperation. Yet, Carol's repeated aggression left Rena unsympathetic to any moral gray areas. Over time, the building manager discreetly confirmed that Carol was under review by the National Immigration Agency. This official inquiry might lead to revoking her residency or even deportation if found guilty of fraud. Throughout Crestwood Estates, speculation soared. Some neighbors, especially those who'd endured Carol's meddling, felt vindicated. Others expressed pity, lamenting a possibly harsh outcome for a person who had, ironically, been the harshest enforcer of belonging. In the midst of swirling gossip, Rena tried to maintain perspective. She'd never desired to ruin Carol's life, only to stop her from weaponizing the complex's rules and local police. If that meant unmasking Carol's own illegality, so be it. In the weeks that followed, new complexities emerged. One neighbor, Brandon Smith, found evidence linking Carol to a defunct business empire in Laronia, including a web of bank transactions that contradicted her earlier narrative of fleeing hardship. Rena had glimpsed a fraction of this during her online digging, but Brandon's deeper search suggested Carol's entire stay in the country rested on shaky claims of persecution. Instead, she might have come purely for economic advantage, forging sob stories for sympathy. Though Rena recognized many immigrants come for better economic prospects, the difference was Carol's apparent deception under oath, claiming dire circumstances to expedite her residency. Coupled with her brazen attempts to police other tenants, it painted a stark picture of hypocrisy. Rena felt a renewed sense of moral certainty in having reported Carol. If there was a fraction of her that worried about punishing someone vulnerable, it diminished as more evidence showcased how calculated Carol's manipulations were. One evening, while relaxing in her apartment, Rena's phone buzzed with a text from a fellow resident named Odette. "Carol's outside, yelling at the building manager. Something about eviction?" Heart pounding, Rena peeked through her window. Indeed, outside by the manager's office, Carol ranted as the manager tried to stay calm. Rena couldn't hear every word, but phrases like "unfair treatment" and "this is my home" carried clearly. After a few heated minutes, Carol stomped off again. In the aftermath, the manager sent out a memo acknowledging that Carol's lease might face termination if her legal residency was revoked. Rena read the message feeling unsettled. These developments had turned an already hostile neighbor into a cornered figure, potentially lashing out more dangerously. She double-checked her door locks each night, ironically recalling how the entire conflict began with a single desire to secure her own living space. Days blurred into a tense waiting game until a plain white van from the National Immigration Agency appeared one morning. Rena observed from her window as two officials approached Carol's unit. They emerged moments later with Carol in tow, her expression stricken with a blend of anger and fear. A hush settled over the courtyard, reminiscent of the day Carol had the police come for Rena. The roles, now reversed, felt surreal. Later, neighbors whispered that Carol had been placed under formal detention, her immigration case advanced to a deportation hearing. Some found it harsh, recalling how swiftly justice could strike. Others considered it karma, given her oppressive stance. Through hushed chatter, Rena learned the hearing would likely reveal whether Carol's entire residency was built on perjury. For Rena, the shock was tempered by relief. She'd spent too many months feeling singled out, dealing with Carol's false accusations. Now, the system was addressing Carol's own wrongdoing. However, a glimmer of pity flickered in Rena's heart. Despite Carol's aggression, it was a grim fate to face possible removal from a place she'd called home for years. That pity wrestled with Rena's memory of Carol's relentless harassment. In the end, Rena concluded that Carol had chosen this path by weaponizing 911 calls and forging documents. In the days that followed Carol's removal, Crestwood Estates exhaled a collective sigh. The environment felt lighter, as if a tension that weighed on everyone had dissolved. Rena, returning from work, found the pool area pleasantly calm, no watchful eyes, no insinuations of trespassing. Some neighbors timidly chatted with her, acknowledging they'd stood by in silence while Carol reigned, but now recognized Rena's perseverance exposed a deeper wrongdoing. Though Carol's final outcome remained uncertain, her deportation case could take months, possibly years, her immediate influence over the complex vanished. Rena felt safer, more at ease. She also sensed a broader lesson: intolerance, whether rooted in racism or personal insecurity, eventually collapses under the scrutiny of facts. Carol's aggressive policing ironically led to her own status being policed. In her quiet apartment, Rena sometimes reflected on how a simple desire to swim had evolved into a confrontation with far-reaching consequences. She'd confronted prejudice, false accusations, and uncovered lies that propelled her to push back, ultimately involving national authorities. With Carol gone, Rena felt a renewed sense of belonging, one forged not by some official's approval, but by standing firm for her rights. Stepping onto her balcony, Rena gazed out at the courtyard where the messy saga played out. She took a final mental snapshot of how swiftly life could shift. She'd learned that resisting injustice might be inconvenient or nerve-wracking, but it also changed a neighborhood for the better. As she closed the balcony door, a quiet resolve settled within her: if ever confronted again by bigotry or hypocrisy, she would respond the same way, by shining a bright light on the truth. When Carol Mullins was taken into custody by the National Immigration Agency, many at Crestwood Estates assumed that concluded the saga. For Rena Parker, though, the aftermath proved surprisingly intricate. Questions arose about the extent of Carol's alleged fraud, the timeline of her false statements, and whether she'd manipulated the system for personal gain. These details trickled into the complex's rumor mill, fueling curiosity even as Carol awaited her hearing in a remote facility. Despite the significant turn of events, Rena tried to maintain her usual schedule. She'd get up early, brew a cup of tea, drive to her editorial job in the city, and return home to a calmer courtyard. Gone were the suspicious looks or intrusive notes. The sense of relief was palpable. Yet, as she strolled past the pool one afternoon, a pang of memory tugged at her. It was surreal to recall how innocently it all began, a simple dip to cool off, only to be confronted by Carol's hostility and 911 call. Neighbors often stopped Rena to chat, expressing gratitude that she'd stood her ground. Some admitted they never confronted Carol's antics for fear of drawing attention to themselves. A few confided experiences with her petty rule enforcement, like being chastised for leaving a doormat out longer than the 48-hour limit, or for reading on the courtyard bench too late at night. It confirmed a pattern of intimidation that Rena recognized as part of a bigger strategy to claim moral authority over others. Meanwhile, Ms. Delgado, the older resident who first hinted at Carol's immigration issues, occasionally updated Rena on rumors swirling around the hearing. Allegedly, Carol's father in Laronia had financed her life in the U.S. She'd spun tales of political persecution to obtain certain visas, then pivoted to a permanent residency claim. Over time, she boasted about forging or embellishing documents to align with her self-made narrative. All the while, she acted as though she was the rightful gatekeeper of who belonged in their community, ironically revealing her own questionable status. Amid these developments, Redwood County's local press reached out to Rena for a potential interview, having caught wind of her 911 ordeal and the subsequent unmasking of Carol's background. Rena hesitated. She valued her privacy and didn't relish public attention. But she also recognized the story could highlight an important lesson about prejudice and hypocrisy. Ultimately, she agreed to a short interview, on condition that the piece remain respectful and not sensationalize her personal life. In the published article, Rena's quotes were balanced. She explained how a small conflict, using the complex pool, escalated into a major revelation about Carol's status. She emphasized that while she took no joy in Carol's predicament, justice demanded accountability. People shouldn't weaponize law enforcement for personal vendettas, especially if they themselves were violating laws. The piece resonated with many readers, who praised Rena for her calm determination. As Carol's court hearing approached, a hush fell over Crestwood Estates. Residents remained unsure if she'd be allowed back while awaiting the verdict. Some rummaged through the lease agreements, questioning whether Carol's unit would be repossessed by the building management or if she could continue paying rent from detention, though that seemed unlikely. The building manager posted a reminder that all residents must have valid, lawful occupancy, and that forging records or providing false background was grounds for immediate eviction. This note felt like a direct consequence of the Mullins fiasco. Still, life pressed on. Rena's sense of security grew day by day. She resumed occasional pool visits, reading novels in the lounge area without fear of being accused of trespassing. The comedic irony wasn't lost on her. The once ominous setting now felt almost too peaceful, lacking the tension Carol once injected into daily life. Freed from watchful eyes, the tenants mingled more freely. A group of younger residents even planned a potluck by the pool, something Rena had never seen before. Yet, for Rena, the journey was incomplete. She learned from the building manager that Carol had requested a character witness from the complex, presumably to mitigate her potential deportation. The manager refused, citing Carol's negative influence. Rena wondered if her own name had come up as well, but no one approached her, confirming her suspicion that Carol wouldn't dare ask the person she harassed to defend her. Eventually, the fateful day arrived. Carol's immigration hearing was set for a Monday morning in a federal building downtown. Local reporters hovered outside, eager for a statement. A small group of activists who opposed deportations in general also stood by, though they seemed uncertain how to champion Carol's case, given her track record of harassing neighbors. Meanwhile, Rena opted not to attend. She believed her presence might be misused by Carol's defense, or that the tension would be too high. From second-hand accounts, Rena learned the hearing was tense. Carol appeared with a frazzled lawyer, insisting that any falsehood in her immigration paperwork was exaggerated or unintentional. Government attorneys pointed out the contrived timeline of her so-called persecution in Laronia, referencing her father's ongoing business empire there. They also noted Carol's brazen 911 calls and subsequent conflicts, suggesting she'd shown reckless disregard for U.S. law. The judge was said to be unswayed by Carol's pleas. While not announcing an immediate decision, the judge indicated strong doubts about Carol's eligibility to remain in the country. As the hearing progressed over multiple sessions, Redwood County's local news occasionally updated the public. Rena read these articles with cautious detachment. She recognized the gravity of deportation, an outcome that could drastically upend someone's life. Yet, her empathy waned when recalling how Carol had tried to upend her life too, all because she took a swim. Eventually, the final hearing concluded behind closed doors. Word came that the immigration judge found sufficient grounds for removal, citing Carol's blatant deception and fraudulent claims. The official order for deportation was lodged, though Carol could still file appeals. Over the next few weeks, rumors circulated that she was being held in a detention center, fervently trying to block her removal. Rena gleaned no small satisfaction from the knowledge that, ironically, the system Carol tried to abuse was now holding her accountable. Though some neighbors expressed pity, mentioning they never foresaw Carol's personal downfall, others saw it as karma. In whispered hallway conversations, they echoed Rena's stance: if you hold others to a standard they can't possibly meet, you'd better be certain your own status is beyond reproach. The quiet in Crestwood Estates proved to many that life without Carol's overshadowing presence felt more harmonious. Ultimately, the saga's conclusion arrived not with fanfare but with a quiet official notice: Carol's eviction and the releasing of her apartment. A nondescript letter posted by the building manager stated, Unit 2B has been repossessed by building administration due to occupants' forfeiture of legal status. Rena, spotting the letter, sighed in relief. She thought back to the day she first locked eyes with Carol by the mailroom, noticing the hostility in those eyes. So much had happened since that fleeting moment. In reflection, Rena recognized the entire ordeal had tested her principles. Did she want to meddle in someone's life to the point of deportation? Not really. But faced with repeated harassment and blatant hypocrisy, she refused to stand idle. By shining light on the truth, she upheld both her dignity and the spirit of fairness. As she strolled through the courtyard one last time, everything seemed so tranquil: neighbors chatting, a father teaching his son to swim, the once feared pool now a symbol of daily normalcy. Regardless of Carol's eventual fate in Laronia or any final appeals, Rena felt a calm satisfaction that this chapter had closed. She'd come to Crestwood Estates for the promise of a peaceful home. In exposing Carol's false claims, she preserved not just her own sense of security, but also reminded everyone that bigotry, hypocrisy, and intimidation had no place by the pool, or anywhere else. Late one afternoon, Julia Stiles sat at her small home office desk in her urban apartment complex, intent on finally putting an end to the swirling rumors about her neighbor, Debbie Grayson. For months, Debbie had spun elaborate tales about fleeing persecution, a story that Julia had long suspected was nothing more than a convenient fabrication to mask deeper issues. Determined to uncover the truth, Julia turned to public records, her laptop glowing softly in the fading light. After hours of meticulous searching on county and state websites, Julia discovered a surprising detail: the official records clearly indicated that Debbie was not a citizen but only a permanent resident. The revelation sent a jolt through Julia. With documented evidence that Debbie's immigration status was less secure than she had claimed, suspicions of possible fraud began to mount. Julia couldn't help but wonder if Debbie's entire backstory had been a ruse. A desperate attempt to garner sympathy and authority by exaggerating hardships she never truly endured. Julia reread the digital files carefully, verifying her findings against multiple sources. The public record was unambiguous: Debbie's naturalization documents were absent, and the only immigration paperwork on file was her green card, stamped several years ago. It was then that Julia realized that Debbie's repeated insistence on having fled persecution was not only factually questionable but might be deliberately deceptive. This discrepancy, small as it might seem, was a significant crack in Debbie's carefully constructed narrative. Determined to collect every scrap of evidence, Julia printed out the relevant pages and saved digital copies. In her notebook, she detailed the timeline of events, noting that Debbie's false claims had long been used to justify intrusive behavior and unwarranted authority in their community. The discovery that Debbie was merely a permanent resident, rather than a naturalized citizen, added weight to Julia's growing conviction that something was deeply amiss with Debbie's claims. As the evening wore on, Julia's mind raced with possibilities. Was Debbie using her status as a shield to excuse behavior that was, in reality, driven by a need to assert dominance over neighbors? Julia recalled several instances where Debbie had made cutting remarks about other residents' backgrounds, as if her own supposed persecution gave her a moral high ground. Now, armed with the knowledge that Debbie's immigration status was not as she had portrayed, Julia felt that the truth was finally within reach. By the time midnight approached, Julia had compiled a comprehensive file of evidence, printed public records, screenshots of the immigration database, and detailed notes comparing Debbie's public statements with the factual data. In a moment of resolve, she emailed the file to herself for safekeeping and prepared to plan her next step. The weight of the discovery both emboldened and troubled her, emboldened because it confirmed her suspicions, and troubled because it meant confronting a neighbor who might now fight even harder to maintain her facade. Julia closed her laptop, the quiet hum of the air conditioner in the background, and sat in reflective silence. In that still moment, she resolved that if Debbie continued to use her fabricated story to justify intrusive behavior, then the truth had to be exposed, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. With the facts now on her side, Julia steeled herself for the confrontation that lay ahead, aware that standing up against deception was not only a personal battle but also a stand against the injustice that too often went unchallenged. The following week, emboldened by her recent discovery, Julia Stiles decided it was time to delve deeper into Debbie Grayson's murky past. Over the course of several days, she combed through additional public records, hoping to find any hint of inconsistency in Debbie's narrative about fleeing persecution. Her investigation led her to an unexpected discovery. Debbie's name appeared in connection with a family business operating in Belarus. The connection came to light when Julia was reviewing corporate registration documents online. Initially, she had been searching for any references to Debbie's background, hoping to find corroboration for the story Debbie had spun. Instead, she stumbled upon a business listing that mentioned a Grayson Enterprises, and linked it to an established manufacturing firm in Belarus. The listing was accompanied by images of an elegant building and official seals that bore the same name, Grayson, and a location unmistakably in Belarus. This was in stark contrast to Debbie's repeated claims that she had escaped persecution in a war-torn land and sought refuge in the United States. Instead, it appeared that her family maintained a thriving business empire overseas. Intrigued and disturbed, Julia began to cross-reference these findings with Debbie's personal statements over the past year. Time and again, Debbie had lamented the loss of her homeland and recounted harrowing stories of fleeing violence and oppression. Now, the evidence suggested an entirely different narrative, one of stability, economic opportunity, and a legacy that was anything but fraught with the desperate struggles she described. Julia felt a growing certainty that Debbie's tale was nothing more than a fabrication, a convenient lie meant to gain sympathy and justify her domineering behavior. Determined to verify her findings, Julia reached out to a friend who worked in international business. Her friend confirmed that the company listed in the public records was indeed a well-established enterprise in Belarus, with no indication of any recent turmoil that would necessitate a dramatic escape. With this additional testimony, Julia's resolve hardened. She compiled all the details, the printed documents, screenshots of the business registration, and even a summary of her friend's confirmation. In her notes, she meticulously compared the facts against Debbie's public claims, highlighting the discrepancies for her own reference. Late one night, with the evidence spread out on her dining table, Julia felt a mix of anger and vindication. Here was proof that Debbie's narrative about fleeing persecution was a carefully constructed lie, one that, if exposed, could discredit Debbie's entire authority within the apartment complex. Julia knew that Debbie had used her supposed backstory as a shield, a way to excuse intrusive behavior and justify calling 911 when confronted with minor disagreements. Now, with the truth laid bare, Julia felt empowered to take further action. The next morning, Julia decided to confront the issue head-on. Not immediately, however, she wanted to prepare a solid case, one that couldn't be easily dismissed by Debbie or the apartment management. She spent the next several days organizing her evidence into a comprehensive dossier. Every document was clearly labeled, every discrepancy noted. Julia even drafted an outline of a timeline, mapping out when Debbie had made various claims compared to when the records indicated stability in her homeland. Her careful work paid off when she received an email from a local community advocate who had heard murmurs of immigration fraud in the building. The advocate praised Julia for her initiative and encouraged her to consider sharing the evidence with the appropriate authorities. While Julia hesitated at first, wary of stirring up even more conflict, she realized that in order to stand against the injustice and racism that had marred her interactions with Debbie, the truth must be told. By the end of the week, Julia had arranged a meeting with a representative from the Department of Homeland Security. In that quiet conference room, with her dossier spread before an attentive official, Julia detailed her findings. She explained how Debbie's public records, coupled with the evidence of the Belarus-based family business, painted a starkly different picture from the one Debbie had presented. The official listened intently, asking measured questions and noting down key points. As the meeting concluded, Julia left with a sense of cautious optimism. She knew that if Debbie's claims could be proven false in an official investigation, it would not only vindicate her own position but also help curb Debbie's manipulative behavior. That evening, as she sat by her window, Julia reflected on the importance of uncovering the truth. In standing up against racism and injustice, she felt empowered, and more respected by those who knew the real story. Armed with the damning evidence that Debbie Grayson's story was built on falsehoods, Julia Stiles decided that it was time to confront Debbie directly. The confrontation had been building in the background ever since Julia's investigation revealed that Debbie was only a permanent resident and that her family was tied to a thriving business in Belarus, a fact that completely undermined Debbie's self-portrayal as a persecuted immigrant. The air in the apartment complex had grown heavy with unspoken tension, and Julia knew that for the sake of truth and her own dignity, she had to challenge Debbie's narrative in person. On a cool, crisp morning, Julia found herself face-to-face with Debbie in the common courtyard of the complex. The atmosphere was charged as residents casually milled about, unaware of the impending confrontation that would soon ripple through their community. Julia approached Debbie steadily, dossier in hand, her expression calm but resolute. "Debbie," Julia began, her voice even yet firm, "I'd like to talk to you about something important." Debbie's eyes narrowed as she regarded Julia, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her features before she regained her customary defiant posture. Julia continued, "I've been reviewing public records and documents that clearly show you're a permanent resident, not a citizen, and that your family runs a well-established business in Belarus. This contradicts the stories you've shared about fleeing persecution." Her words were measured, intended not to incite further conflict but to present undeniable facts. Debbie's face flushed, and for a moment, she looked as if she might protest. But then, with a dismissive wave, she scoffed, "So what? I might have exaggerated a bit, but that's just how things are done sometimes. It's common, really." Her tone was defensive, as though admitting a minor embellishment was perfectly acceptable. Julia pressed on gently. "Exaggerated? Debbie, these aren't small details. They're the foundation of the story you've used to justify your behavior. Using your supposed victimhood to intimidate neighbors and claim rights that aren't yours." Julia's eyes met Debbie's, searching for any sign of remorse or vulnerability. "The truth is, your records, the evidence of your family business, and everything I've gathered contradicts your narrative. This isn't a trivial matter, it's a deliberate misrepresentation that affects how you interact with everyone here." Debbie's jaw tightened. "I don't see why you need to expose every little secret," she snapped, voice rising slightly. "It's none of your business if I choose to embellish my past. People do that all the time." Her words, though defiant, lacked the force of conviction they once carried. There was a tremor in her voice that Julia couldn't ignore. "I believe it is everyone's business," Julia replied firmly. "When your story is used to manipulate and harass others, it becomes a matter of public concern. I've documented everything, and I'm not doing this to humiliate you, I'm doing it so that our community can stand against the exploitation of false narratives. We deserve honesty, and if you're going to wield your past as a weapon, it must be held accountable." For a long, tense moment, silence reigned. Debbie's eyes darted around the courtyard, as if searching for allies among the few neighbors watching discreetly. Finally, with a resigned sigh, she said, "Fine. Maybe I did stretch the truth a bit. But that's just how things are, you know, in today's world." Her voice was brittle, and while she attempted to dismiss her actions as commonplace, it was clear that the carefully constructed facade was cracking. Julia took a steady breath. "Debbie, I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to ensure fairness and respect for everyone. I've already shared my findings with the appropriate authorities because misrepresenting one's past to gain undue advantage isn't acceptable. If you have nothing to hide, then there's nothing to worry about." Debbie's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You think you're so righteous, don't you?" she retorted, though her tone was less confident than before. "No, I'm simply asking for honesty," Julia said quietly. "Our community deserves the truth. I hope you can understand that. I'm not doing this to attack you personally, but to prevent further harm that could come from using deception to justify behavior." The tension in the air grew palpable as a few neighbors nearby listened in. After a few more moments, Debbie lowered her gaze, and a fragile silence settled between them. The confrontation had exposed Debbie's vulnerability, a glimpse of someone who might have once felt insecure enough to fabricate her past. Julia, with compassion still intact, added softly, "It's not too late to be honest, Debbie. We all deserve a chance to stand by our truths." Whether Debbie would embrace that opportunity was unclear, but in that moment, Julia's words resonated, and even a couple of onlookers appeared thoughtful. As the conversation wound down, Debbie gave a curt nod and stepped back into the shadows of the courtyard, leaving Julia with a heavy mix of disappointment and hope. The confrontation had not resolved everything, but it marked a turning point, a commitment to truth that would soon have consequences far beyond their private exchange. In the days following her confrontation with Debbie, Julia Stiles felt a resolute clarity about what needed to be done. With the evidence stacked high, from public records confirming that Debbie was only a permanent resident, to the irrefutable documentation linking her to a thriving family business in Belarus, Julia knew she couldn't let the deception continue unchecked. After gathering all her files and organizing her dossier, Julia made the difficult decision to report Debbie's immigration fraud. Late one evening, she dialed the hotline for the Department of Homeland Security. With calm precision, she detailed the discrepancies, the public records that contradicted Debbie's claims of fleeing persecution and the business links in Belarus that painted an entirely different picture. The representative on the line listened intently as Julia explained how these false narratives had been used to justify Debbie's intrusive behavior in the community. Within days, word spread that Debbie had been detained for further questioning. Local news briefly mentioned that federal authorities had taken action after allegations of immigration fraud emerged from a trusted community source. Neighbors who once whispered about Debbie's odd behavior now spoke with a note of vindication. Julia, though not seeking the spotlight, felt a profound sense of relief knowing that the truth was finally being pursued by the proper authorities. The news of Debbie's detention rippled through the apartment complex, altering the dynamic among residents. Those who had suffered from her baseless accusations and intimidation now felt empowered, while many looked to Julia as a beacon of courage and integrity. Despite the storm of uncertainty that typically follows such legal actions, Julia found that her community rallied behind her, expressing gratitude for standing up against a false narrative that had harmed so many. As federal agents continued their investigation, Debbie's situation rapidly escalated into deportation proceedings. The local media, though cautious, picked up on the story, framing it as a reminder of the importance of accountability and transparency when it comes to public figures and community leaders. For Julia, the experience was both bittersweet and galvanizing. She never wished harm on Debbie, but she believed that deception, especially when it fueled racism and injustice, could not be allowed to flourish. In the midst of this unfolding drama, Julia spent long evenings reviewing her evidence and reflecting on the broader implications of her actions. She realized that speaking the truth wasn't merely a personal victory, but a stand against systemic injustice. The experience had deepened her understanding of the importance of integrity and fairness in maintaining a respectful community. By the end of the week, as the Department of Homeland Security prepared to issue a formal statement on Debbie's detention and the initiation of deportation proceedings, Julia felt a quiet empowerment settle over her. She had risked revealing painful truths for the sake of justice, and in doing so, she had helped protect her community from the corrosive effects of deceit. While the outcome for Debbie remained uncertain, Julia's resolve was clear: she would continue to stand against racism and injustice, unafraid to challenge those who sought to manipulate the truth. In the aftermath of Debbie's detention and the initiation of deportation proceedings, Julia Stiles took a moment to reflect on the tumultuous journey that had brought her to this point. Sitting in the quiet of her modest apartment, she reviewed the evidence and recollected the conversations that had shaped her determination to expose the truth. It was a personal triumph, one that resonated deeply within her and among her community. Julia recalled the hours spent poring over public records, the shocking realization that Debbie was merely a permanent resident rather than a citizen, and the subsequent discovery of a family business in Belarus that completely contradicted Debbie's narrative of fleeing persecution. Those moments of revelation had not only shattered the false image Debbie had carefully crafted but had also reaffirmed Julia's commitment to standing up against deception and racism. With a steady heart, Julia reflected on the confrontation with Debbie, where Debbie had finally admitted to exaggerating her backstory. Although Debbie had tried to dismiss her fabrications as commonplace, Julia knew that such distortions were harmful. They allowed someone to manipulate others and wield unjust influence over the community. Reporting the findings to the Department of Homeland Security had been a difficult decision, but one that underscored Julia's belief that truth must prevail. As she sat by her window, watching the gentle glow of the evening sky over the city, Julia felt a profound sense of empowerment. Her actions had not only forced Debbie to face legal consequences but had also sparked a broader dialogue about fairness, honesty, and accountability within the community. Neighbors, once divided by whispers and suspicion, now looked to Julia for leadership and clarity. They appreciated that she had the courage to challenge the status quo, even when it meant confronting someone who had, for so long, used her supposed vulnerability to justify intrusive behavior. In that quiet moment, Julia acknowledged that the road ahead might still be fraught with challenges. Debbie's eventual fate, whether through deportation or further legal appeals, remained uncertain. However, the experience had transformed Julia. She no longer felt like a passive bystander in the face of injustice. Instead, she recognized her role as an active advocate for truth and fairness. The newfound respect from her community was palpable. Friends and neighbors reached out with gratitude, commending her for shining a light on an uncomfortable truth. This support reinforced Julia's resolve to continue speaking out against racism and injustice, not only for herself but for anyone who might be victimized by false narratives and manipulative power. As the night deepened, Julia closed her journal, her notes filled with detailed observations and reflections on the ordeal. With a calm certainty, she prepared for tomorrow, determined to uphold the values that had guided her through these turbulent times. In that final moment of introspection, Julia felt reassured that by standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult, she had not only defended her dignity but had also helped foster a community where truth and respect could flourish. Hey everyone! If you found this story powerful and meaningful, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell to never miss our thought-provoking content. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, educate, and challenge perspectives. Thank you for being part of this journey.